Hi you guys. I love wearing t-shirts. They're comfortable, they're easy to throw on with a pair of jeans or shorts, but I also like to dress them up. I have no problem throwing on a t-shirt with a suit or a business skirt, accessorizing with diamonds or pearls, and rocking it. The thing about sewing your own clothes is the possibilities are endless with fabric choices and designs for creating your own t-shirts. And when you have your own custom t-shirt that fits your body, oh, honey, it's all good. If you like t-shirts too, keep watching because I have something for you. Welcome back to my channel for those of you who are returning. If you're new here, visiting for the first time, thank you so much for stopping by. I'm Anita with Anita by Design, and here on my channel you will find step-by-step, very detailed sew-alongs and tutorials to help you with your sewing projects. If you're brand new to sewing, have never sewn anything before, I have a beginner's sewing course here on my channel that will teach you the basics of sewing. So if you're new, go and check out the course and then come back here and join us. Today we're going to be sewing a t-shirt, and we're using Burda 6910, and this t-shirt has ruching on the side. That's gathering for those of you who are not familiar with that term. So we're going to create this cute little t-shirt, and I am so in love with it. This is my second one, and there will probably be another one in the future. It's a great fit, it's easy to sew, beginner friendly, and I'm going to walk you through the steps, very detailed, to help you sew this t-shirt too. To sew the t-shirt, we're going to need two-way stretch fabric and elastic. I'm using 1/4 inch elastic, and I will link to all the other supplies that I'm using for this sew along in the description box below. But I do want to mention that we will be using a twin needle for hemming and for top stitching around the neckline of the t-shirt. So I want you to check your instruction manual on your sewing machine. I'm going to be sewing with the Baby Lock Soprano sewing machine and the Baby Lock Vibrant serger. So check your manual to learn how to thread your machine for sewing with twin needle. Make sure you transfer all of your markings from your tissue paper onto your fabric to make sure everything lines up when we're pinning and sewing the pieces together. And that's about it. We are ready, so let's get started. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is take care of our prep work, starting with preparing the hems. You're going to take your shirt front and apply interfacing. I cut a 1-inch strip of interfacing and pressed it on the length of the hem, and after that you're going to finish off the raw edge. I serged my edge. You can use whichever method you choose, and the reason we're stabilizing the hems is because we're going to be inserting our hem using a twin needle, and I want to eliminate first of all stretching of the fabric while we're hemming, and I want to reduce the amount of tunneling that happens a lot of times when you're sewing with a twin needle. And I find that interfacing, stabilizing that area helps to reduce the tunneling. Okay, so you're going to do that with the shirt front and the shirt back. You're also going to stabilize your hem on the sleeves. So same thing, 1 inch wide strip, cut the length of the sleeve, finish off the raw edges, and then the hems are prepared. Okay, next we're going to prepare our neck binding strip. So you're going to take your strip, it was cut in a single layer, you're going to fold it over with the raw edges meeting, and then you're going to give it a good press. Okay, then set that aside. Finally, you're going to need 2 strips of elastic. I'm using 1/4 inch elastic, and you're going to cut 2 strips 8 inches long, and these are going to be used to create the ruching on the side seams of the t-shirt. Okay, next we're going to attach the front and back together at the side seams. You'll notice we have 2 notches at the side seams. We have a notch at the top near the arm side, and then we have another notch at the bottom near the hem. In between these two notches is where we're going to apply the elastic to create the ruching at the side of the t-shirt. So we have the front here with the right side facing up. We're going to take the back and place it right on top. And we have the right sides facing. So we're going to start pinning at the notch. And then we're going to go down to the bottom and line up the notches. Okay, then let's go down to the hem and pin. And then back up to the arm side. Okay, then we're going to continue pinning in between the two notches, making sure that our raw edges are even. And after that, we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to insert a narrow zigzag stitch at the 5/8 inch seam allowance. Before we go to the sewing machine, I want to bring something to your attention. When you're pinning the middle area between the two notches, you're going to notice that the front is longer than the back. It's okay. Go ahead and continue pinning, and then when we get to the sewing machine, when we come to the area where the front is longer, we're just going to stretch it. We're going to pull it so that the two seams, or the front and the back, line up evenly. And there's not a whole lot of pulling or stretching that we have to do. It's just a little bit, and that's okay because the top is going to be ruched anyway. Just wanted to let you know that in case you notice it and became concerned about that. It's okay. Okay, make sure you have your machine set to a narrow zigzag stitch. I'm using a 2.5 millimeter stitch length and a 0.5 millimeter stitch width. And then we're going to begin and end with a back stitch. Okay, and we have our narrow zigzag stitch. Okay, this next step is optional. You don't have to finish off the raw edges if you don't want to. Knits don't tend to ravel. However, I like for the insides of my garments to look pretty, so I'm going to serge the raw edge. And I have disengaged the cutting blade, and I'm going to run my fabric right along this edge here and serge just to finish off the edges. I'm not cutting off any of the seam allowance because we're going to be inserting the elastic inside of the seam allowance. So I'm just going to serge this to make it look pretty. And there we have our raw edge serged, and it looks nice and neat on the inside. Now it's time to insert our elastic at the side to create the ruching on the sides. So we have our 8-inch strip of elastic, and we're going to start at the notch at the top near the arm side. Where the notch is, you're going to place your elastic right at the notch within the seam allowance, and then you're going to pin. Then we're going to go down to the bottom near the hem, find the notch, and we're going to pin the elastic right at the notch within the seam allowance. Okay, now next we're going to take the 2 notches, place them together, and fold the fabric. We're finding the center of that space. So we've folded the notches together, and there's the center. We're going to take a pin and place it right in the center and hold the place. We're going to do the same thing with the elastic. We're going to take the edges of the elastic, place it together, and we're going to find the center of the elastic and place a pin. Now we're going to take the elastic and the center of the fabric and place those together. And then we're going to pin inside of the seam allowance. Okay, then we're going to go in between these two, and we're going to stretch the elastic until it's straight. I'm going to press the fabric flat on the table, and I'm going to walk my fingers over to the center, and I'm going to grab that. Oh, I let it go. And I'm going to place it flat on the table, and I'm going to walk my fingers over to the center area, and I'm going to pick it up, and I'm going to pin right there within the seam allowance. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to stretch the elastic, place it flat on the table, walk my fingers over to the center area, and pin. Okay, so this is what you will have. This is what it should look like. Now when we go to the sewing machine, we're not going to do any more pinning at this point. When we go to the sewing machine, we're going to sew, and we're going to stretch the elastic in between the pins as we sew. We're going to be stretching from the front and the back of the needle. So in this area we're going to stretch, then we'll move down and stretch, and we'll continue that until the elastic is sewn in. So let's go to the machine. Okay, so we're going to place the seam allowance under the presser foot, and what I have done is I've turned that first pin parallel with the elastic to make it easier to get it under, to start it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a little bit before the elastic starts. I'm going to start maybe half an inch before the elastic begins. So let's lower the presser foot. And when we're sewing, we're going to stretch from the front and the back just enough to straighten out the elastic. So before I start stretching, I'm just going to go ahead and sew up to that elastic to catch it in with the needles. Okay, and right when I catch them in with the needles, I'm going to go ahead and stretch this first section until the elastic is straight. I'm going to remove that pin. Okay, my elastic is straight in that area, and hold the elastic where the next pin is when you're stretching. And you want to make sure that the needles are catching both edges of your elastic, and then you want to make sure that you're holding the fabric from the back here in back of the needle. And just take your time so that you're careful to catch in the elastic. And you're not doing too much pulling, you're just pulling just enough to straighten out the elastic from the front and the back. You don't want to pull too much because you don't want to put stress on your needles. When I say too much, you don't want to pull too much in one direction or the other. You just want to pull to keep your elastic straight. Okay, we're going to remove the next pin and grab the next one and pull, making sure that your elastic is staying within the seam allowance. Let's remove the next pin. And you're just going to continue this all the way until you reach the other end. Whenever you stop to reposition, make sure that the needles are down in or inserted down into the fabric. Okay, we're coming up on the last section. Okay, and as you draw to the end, you want to keep your finger on that elastic. I'm going to remove the pin and keep your finger right there and continue sewing. And before your finger goes any further, you can remove it and continue sewing. And then I'm going to backstitch. Oh. Okay, and our elastic is inserted. There we have it from the other side. And it's created our ruching, and you'll see that once we turn it to the right side out. Okay, you want to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side, and then I'll meet you back at the machine. Okay, now we're going to sew our seam in the sleeves. Here I have pinned my sleeve together at the underarm edge. Here we have the bottom hem, and then you just turn it to the side, pin the sides together, and we're just going to insert a zigzag stitch there. Make sure after you change from your twin needle, when you reinstall your single needle, make sure that you change your stitching to a zigzag stitch. And there we have it. Then you're going to go, and if you're finishing off your edges, go ahead and finish off the raw edge, and then you're going to press your seam to one side. Press your seam toward the back of the sleeve. So you're going to just press it to one side. And then we'll come back and insert our sleeve into the t-shirt. Okay, now we're ready to insert our sleeve. We have the top with the armhole opening here, and we have our sleeve. What we're going to do is we're going to attach the sleeve starting where the seam is on the shirt and the seam on the sleeve. We're going to put those two together, match up the seams evenly. And make sure you're using the correct sleeve. And the way you're going to know that is the notches. The notches should line up. So we have the notch on the sleeve and the notch on the top. So this is the correct sleeve for this side of the t-shirt. So line up your notches. Ooh, slippery. And then I'm going to go up to the top and pin at the shoulder edge. Then we'll go back and pin in between those two. Okay, so we have this side pinned. Now we're going to go and pin over on the other side. So we're just going to take the sleeve and shift it over. And I'm going to start right here next to the seam actually. Let's go ahead and pin that in place. Then I'm going to go up to the shoulder area and pin at the edge. And then I'll pin in between. Okay, this is what it should look like. Here we have it pinned at the underarm section, and then this is the shoulder area. And we're just going to insert a narrow zigzag stitch all the way around from one end to the other. Okay, let's insert our fabric and begin stitching. Make sure that raw edge is even. Okay, after you have finished sewing in your seam, go ahead and finish your seam allowance with whichever method you choose, and then we will come back and insert the neck binding. Okay, we have our sleeves attached. I've inserted the seam, finished off the raw edges, and pressed the seam toward the sleeve. The next step is to attach the neck binding to the neckline, but before we do that, we have to trim away some of the seam allowance for the neckline. And the reason we have to do that is because the binding strip that we have includes a 3/8 inch seam allowance. The seam allowance around the neck edge is a 5/8 inch allowance. So we have to reduce this allowance to 3/8 of an inch. So we're going to trim away 1/4 of an inch from the neckline so that we have 3/8 on the shirt and the binding to sew it together. So what I've done is, you can see this line that I've traced, dashed line that I've traced around the neckline. I just used my seam gauge and went around. I put it to the 1/4 inch mark and went around and just traced dashed lines around the entire neckline. And what we're going to do next is we're going to trim this off, and then we'll sew the binding. But I'm going to use the tracing wheel to trim the neck edge because it is so much easier, and you'll get a much more precise line on this neck edge, especially when you're using such a thin, slinky fabric as what I'm using. Okay, I'm going to get my rotary cutter and the cutting mat and then show you how I trim this away. Okay, we're going to make sure that the bottom layer of fabric is out of the way. and just flatten out your fabric. And you're just going to take your rotary cutter and roll it right along that line. Okay, and we're going to turn it around, and we're just going to work our way all the way around the neckline, cutting away that 1/4 inch. And just take your time. You don't need to rush through this. You want to be very precise so that when we attach the neck binding, everything will line up evenly. And there we have it. Okay, with the right side of the shirt facing out, we're going to apply the neck binding. I'm going to use a different method than what the instructions suggest to apply the neck binding. They have you to apply it with the ends of the neck binding open, and then you're going to close it or actually fold it over and turn it in. I don't like that. I closed my neck binding in advance, so I just sewed in a 1/2 inch seam allowance at the edge, at the raw edge on the short end, to close that up. And I did a 1/2 inch seam allowance because I measured this around my neckband. Or around the neckline of the shirt. I actually pinned it around to see how much extra fabric I would have at the end, and it totaled to be 1/2 inch. So I pinned out or sewed the 1/2 inch seam allowance. You can measure your neck binding around your neckline by doing the same thing. Just pin it around and see how much extra you have, and then just go ahead and sew that seam. After you've done that, go ahead and open out the seam allowance and fold it back in half. Okay, so your binding is ready. What we're going to do next is we're going to find the center front. I'm going to actually allow the seam of my binding to be at the center back of my shirt. The instructions have you to place it at the armhole seam, or the seam at the shoulder where the sleeve is attached. I'm going to, again, place this at the center back of my t-shirt. So I need to find the center front, and to do that we're just going to fold at the center back and go over to the center front and just place a pin. Okay, and we're going to set that aside. Then we need to find the center front and the center back on our t-shirt. So you're going to take the front seams for where the sleeve is attached. You're going to put those seams together, match those seams up, and then go find the center front just by folding it out and place a pin there. We're going to do the same thing to find the center back. Take the seams on the back of the shirt, place those together, and then fold out to the center back and place a pin. Okay, let's open that out. Okay, we're going to take our neck binding and let's go ahead and pin that center back together to keep it from opening while we're working with it. Okay, we're going to lay it on top of the shirt, and we're going to take it and flip it around, making sure that the center back seam is with the center back seam of the binding is with the center back seam of the shirt. And we're going to pin into place. And then we're going to bring the front over and pin it in place, matching the center fronts. And then we're just going to work our way around the neckline, pinning the binding to the shirt. You will have to stretch the binding to make it fit into the neckline of the t-shirt. That's normal. Let's go back around to the center front. And continue pinning around. Okay, our binding has been pinned all the way around. Now we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch a 3/8 inch seam allowance all the way around the neckline. Okay, first I'm going to remove the flatbed attachment from my machine, because whenever I'm sewing anything in the round, I like to have access to this free arm because I can just place the fabric right around that. Okay, and I am starting at the center back seam. So find the 3/8 inch mark on your machine, the 3/8 inch measurement, and line your fabric up with that. Mine happens to be the edge of my walking foot, so that will make it easy for me. I'm going to remove that pin and make sure your machine is set to the narrow zigzag stitch. Okay, and we're going to just sew all the way around and take your time. When you come upon a seam, turn it over to make sure that the seam is lying flat, especially if you didn't pin the seam allowance down. And if you need to, pull your binding to line up or to make it even with your neckline. Don't stretch your neckline on the shirt, just the binding. And when you're coming around to meet the stitching where it began, make sure you line it up. Overlap about 1/4 of an inch and then back stitch. Okay, and we have attached the neck binding. You have your stretch. Next, we're going to trim off about half of that seam allowance, and we're going to go to the pressing station. First, you want to press the seam flat to seal it in. Then you're going to fold it in, fold the binding to the inside of your t-shirt and press. Give it a good press, and then we're going to come back and sew in or do a top stitch with our twin needle. Okay, I want to show you what I did at the pressing station. I pressed the seam allowance. After trimming the seam allowance, I pressed it toward the neck binding, okay? And then after that, I folded the neck binding to the inside, and when you fold it to the inside, there will be a little bit of the shirt folding over with it. So you're going to see a little bit of the shirt on the inside, and you want that because when we look at it from the front side, we're not going to see any of the binding. Okay, and then after as I was pressing to keep it in place, as I continued to press around, I just inserted pins parallel with the binding. So I press this area, then I inserted a pin. Then I pressed the next area and inserted a pin, and just worked my way all the way around the neckline. Next, we're going to go to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch using our twin needle. So we're going to have 2 lines of stitching on the top, and then of course it will create a zigzag stitch on the back. So let's head over to the machine. Okay, I've inserted the fabric under the presser foot, and you want to check the distance of the fold where the binding is turned in to the back on the inside, because you want to make sure that your left needle is catching the edge of the binding here. So here's our left needle. Use your hand wheel and turn or insert the needles into the fabric and check it to make sure that it's catching the binding on the folded edge inside. And you can just feel the ridge right here to know where it ends, and for me it is hitting that binding. So for my machine, that is just inside the 1/4 inch mark, and it's right along the inside edge. It's right along the inside edge of my walking foot. So that's going to be my guide. Okay, we're going to begin and end with a back stitch, and remember to set your machine at a straight stitch because we're using the twin needle, and increase your stitch length to about a 3.5 or a 4. You can test it on the fabric that you're using, but that tends to be a pretty good length for the twin needle to prevent the tunneling. Okay, let's get started. And just take your time on this. Okay, and when you come back to meet your original stitching, make sure that everything is in line and that those stitches will meet each other just perfectly. There we go. And then I'm going to back stitch. Okay, and there we have our top stitching done. Let's turn it over. And you see that it created the zigzag stitch on the back, and everything looks good. Next, we're going to sew in our hems. You can press up your seam allowance on the sleeves, and you should have already pressed up the seam allowance on the bottom hem. Now, what you should do is try on your t-shirt first. The suggestion for the hems in the pattern instructions is 1 1/4 inch for the sleeves and 1 5/8 of an inch for the bottom. You may require a different hem, so try on your shirt and see what length you want your sleeves and the bottom of your t-shirt, and then go from there and then press up your hems. If you're changing your hem on the bottom, that's just fine. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to top stitch again with the twin needle for the hems. So let's turn it right side out, put that under. I pressed up a 1 5/8 inch hem for my t-shirt because after checking the length, it works for me. So again, stitching from the top, the right side of the fabric, we're going to insert the needle or the fabric to just inside where the edge meets, and you will have to determine where that is on your machine because based on the hem allowance that you choose, it may be different from mine. So I'm going to line mine up about right here, and then we're just going to stitch all the way around. Okay, so there's our hem on the bottom of the shirt, and there we are on the inside. You're going to do the same thing with your sleeves, and then we are done with the t-shirt. Well, that's it. We are done with our t-shirt, and here she is. So cute. I'm gonna go put it on, style it, make it look really cute, get some pictures so I can come back and show you guys. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you have enjoyed it, make sure you hit the like button below, and if you'd like to see more, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment if you like. Let me know if you're enjoying this content. That helps me to know that it's okay to continue bringing more for you. I am so happy to be back into creating videos for you guys, and as always, remember, when you live in your design, it is from there that God shines. That means when you live according to the way that you have been created, it is from that place that God will use you to bless other people. Thank you. I'll see you next time. Bye.